Welcome to Life Story 999. In today's moving tale, an elderly man waits days at the airport. Security uncovers the heartbreaking truth. We witness a story of patience, trust, and the heartbreak of deception. Stay tuned to uncover the mysterious journey of an elderly man waiting alone with a bouquet in hand, a mystery that touched airport security deeply and led to a shocking revelation. If you enjoy stories like this, please like, comment, and subscribe to Life Story 999 for more captivating tales. The day begins like any other for 30-year-old security officer Ben Collins as he starts his shift at Northwind Airport. It is early morning, and the airport is just beginning to wake up. Travelers shuffle through the main hall, luggage in tow, their faces still sleepy from early wake-up calls. As Ben walks his usual route, scanning the surroundings for anything out of the ordinary, his eyes are drawn to a particular figure sitting on one of the benches. An elderly man, probably in his late 80s, sits alone with a small travel pillow next to him and a bouquet of roses held gently in his hands. The flowers are beautiful but noticeably wilting, their once vibrant petals drooping. The man himself is dressed in an elegant suit, each piece carefully chosen and pressed, though his posture reveals the weariness of age. He gazes toward the arrivals area, eyes scanning each new passenger, his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. Something about this gentleman makes Ben pause longer than usual, a moment of curiosity breaking through the rhythm of his routine. Over the next few days, Ben notices the elderly man again and again, always in the same place. The first day, Ben thought it might just be a long wait, maybe for a flight delayed by some unfortunate circumstance. But as each day passes and the elderly man remains, Ben finds himself growing more and more intrigued. The man's dedication is clear. He sits there patiently, the bouquet still in his lap, although the flowers now show clear signs of age. The scene becomes almost a fixture in Ben's daily routine, a piece of the landscape that he cannot ignore. Ben is no stranger to people waiting at airports for long periods. He has seen joyful reunions, tearful farewells, and even arguments over misconnections. But there is something different about this elderly gentleman. Unlike the usual impatience or frustration that often accompanies delays, the old man exudes an air of quiet resilience. His eyes follow the ebb and flow of travelers looking, hoping, but the exhaustion etched on his face tells a story of disappointment that seems to be wearing on him. Ben's curiosity soon grows into a deeper concern. It isn't just that the man is waiting. It's how long he's been waiting, how his gaze seems to grow weary each time Ben sees him. The bouquet of roses is now visibly wilted, yet the man holds them as though they still mean the world to him, as if letting them go would be giving up on whatever or whoever he's waiting for. There's a part of Ben that wants to approach, to ask if everything is all right, but he hesitates. He has his duties, and he doesn't want to intrude on what could be a personal moment. On the fourth morning, Ben finally decides that he can't just let it go. As he walks through the terminal, he spots the elderly man again, in his usual place, holding those now fully drooping roses. There's a fragility to the scene that tugs at Ben's sense of compassion. He has always believed in the importance of treating people with care and respect, and this moment feels like one of those times when doing anything, is better than doing nothing. Ben takes a deep breath, straightens his uniform, and approaches the bench. "Good morning, sir," he says, his voice gentle yet firm. The elderly man looks up, startled at first, and then smiles warmly. Up close, Ben can see the lines etched deeply in the man's face, the kind of lines that tell stories of laughter, hardship, and years well lived. "Good morning," the man replies, his voice soft but clear. There is a kindness in his eyes, a hint of gratitude at being noticed. "I hope I'm not causing any trouble, young man." Ben shakes his head quickly. "Not at all, sir. I've just noticed you've been here a few days now. I wanted to make sure everything was all right. Are you waiting for someone?" The elderly man nods, and a wistful smile spreads across his face. "Yes, I am," he says. He glances down at the roses, touching the petals gently as though the flowers themselves were fragile memories. I'm waiting for a very special person. She's supposed to be arriving soon. I wouldn't want to miss her for the world." Ben feels a pang of empathy as he listens. There's something deeply touching about the man's dedication, the way he waits patiently despite the evident toll it's taking on him. "Is there anything I can help you with, sir?" Ben asks. "Maybe some water or a snack while you wait." The man shakes his head, his smile never wavering. "You're very kind, young man, but I'm all right. I just need to be here when she arrives." He pauses, as if lost in a memory. "You see, I haven't seen her in years. We lost touch, but recently we found each other again. She told me she'd be arriving here, and I want to be the first person she sees." Ben nods, feeling his heart tighten at the man's words. There's a simplicity and sincerity in the elderly man's story that speaks to something deep within him. He knows he can't just walk away now, not without doing something more. "Well, I'll be around if you need anything," Ben says. "My name's Ben. Don't hesitate to ask for me, okay?" The elderly man, Mr. Grant, as Ben learns, smiles again, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Ben. That means a lot to me. My name is Grant." Ben walks away, but his thoughts remain with Mr. Grant. There's something about the situation that doesn't sit right with him, a feeling that maybe Mr. Grant's wait isn't going to end the way he hopes. As Ben continues his shift, he keeps an eye on the arrivals hall, his gaze frequently drifting back to where Mr. Grant sits waiting, the wilting roses still cradled in his hands. That evening, as Ben prepares to leave, he passes through the arrivals hall one last time. Mr. Grant is still there, his posture a little more slumped, his eyes a little more tired. Ben's heart aches at the sight. He knows he can't simply leave without trying to help further. He approaches Mr. Grant once more, this time determined to do more than just offer comfort. "Mr. Grant," Ben says gently, "it's getting late. Are you sure there's nothing I can do? Maybe we could try to check on the flight details together." Mr. Grant looks up, and for a moment, Ben sees a vulnerability in his eyes. "Maybe," Mr. Grant says slowly, as if considering the offer for the first time. "I suppose it couldn't hurt to check." Ben smiles, offering his arm to help Mr. Grant stand. Together, they walk towards the information desk, and Ben feels a sense of purpose settle over him. Whatever happens next, he knows he's doing the right thing, helping someone who, despite his quiet strength, clearly needs it. And as they move through the bustling airport, Ben can't help but hope that somehow this story will find its happy ending. Ben's concern for Mr. Grant grows deeper with each passing day. He watches the elderly man sit in the same spot, his quiet yet anxious demeanor becoming more pronounced. The bouquet of roses, once vibrant, now has wilted petals drooping heavily. Mr. Grant seems oblivious to the passage of time, his gaze still fixed toward the arrivals area. His hope is unwavering as it is heartbreaking. Each time Ben passes by, he can't help but feel a sense of urgency building inside him. Every day, Ben approaches Mr. Grant with an offer. "Would you like something to eat, Mr. Grant? Maybe a coffee to help you wait." Ben tries to help, and though Mr. Grant always responds with a polite decline, his gratitude is evident in his eyes. "Thank you, young man," he says softly, his voice marked with an undercurrent of anticipation. "She'll be here soon. I just know it." The routine continues for days, and with each day, Ben feels a tightening knot in his chest. Something isn't right. People don't just wait at an airport for days on end without a solid reason, and Mr. Grant's resolve, though admirable, is beginning to seem misplaced. Ben knows there is more to Mr. Grant's story than he is letting on, but it isn't Ben's place to pry. And yet, every time he sees the elderly man alone, clutching those now nearly dead roses, Ben feels a pang of worry. The scene remains unchanged, Mr. Grant in his neatly pressed suit, sitting at the edge of the bench, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes filled with both hope and exhaustion. Ben finds himself unable to ignore the growing suspicion in his mind. Maybe Mr. Grant was misled. Maybe the person he was waiting for wasn't coming at all. Or perhaps something even more tragic had occurred. Regardless, Ben couldn't shake the thought that if he didn't do something soon, Mr. Grant might continue to sit there until he simply couldn't anymore. It's the sixth day when Ben finally decides he needs to take some sort of action. That morning, as he makes his rounds, he stops by Mr. Grant's usual bench. "Morning, Mr. Grant," Ben says warmly, though his concern shows in his eyes. Mr. Grant looks up, his smile tired but genuine. "Morning, Ben. She'll be here today. I'm sure of it." His voice is hopeful, but there is a weariness in his tone that wasn't there before. Ben takes a seat beside Mr. Grant, deciding that today he's going to do more than just offer food or a kind word. He needs to understand more. "Mr. Grant," Ben begins gently, "I know it's not my place, but I'm worried about you. You've been here waiting for almost a week now. Are you sure everything is okay? Is there someone I can call for you?" Mr. Grant sighs, and for a moment, Ben sees the man's confident facade slip. There is a vulnerability in his eyes, a flicker of something, perhaps doubt, perhaps pain, that he quickly tries to hide. "I know it seems strange, Ben," he says quietly, "but she's the love of my life. We lost touch so long ago, and now she's finally coming back to me. I have to be here when she arrives." Ben listens, his heart aching. There is such sincerity in Mr. Grant's words, such deep devotion, and yet everything about the situation feels off. Something isn't adding up. He places a reassuring hand on Mr. Grant's shoulder. "I understand, Mr. Grant, but let me help you. We could check the flight information together, make sure everything is on track. Maybe there's been a mix-up, or we could find more details about her arrival. I just want to make sure you're okay." Mr. Grant hesitates, looking down at the roses, the once bright red petals now darkened and curled at the edges. Finally, he nods. "Maybe you're right," he whispers, his voice barely audible. "It wouldn't hurt to check." Ben helps Mr. Grant to his feet, noticing how frail the man feels under his supportive grip. Together, they make their way toward the information desk, Ben moving slowly so Mr. Grant can keep up. As they walk, Ben finds himself filled with both determination and a sense of foreboding. He hopes, more than anything, that the story Mr. Grant has been telling himself will somehow be true, that the woman he loves will indeed walk through those airport doors. But deep down, he fears that this will not end as Mr. Grant hopes. At the information desk, Ben speaks to the attendant, explaining the situation as gently as he can while Mr. Grant stands beside him, his eyes fixed on the screen displaying the arrival times. The attendant types quickly, her face kind but serious as she searches for the information they need. After a moment, she looks up, her eyes meeting Ben's, a soft shake of her head conveying what Ben already feared. "I'm sorry," she says, her voice gentle, "but there is no record of the flight or passenger with that name. Are you sure of the details?" Mr. Grant's face falls, and Ben feels the weight of the moment settle between them. He places a hand on Mr. Grant's back, offering what comfort he can. "It's okay, Mr. Grant. We'll figure this out together. Maybe there's been a mistake or some kind of delay. Let's not give up just yet." Mr. Grant nods slowly, his expression a mix of confusion and heartbreak. The hope that had kept him sitting on that bench for days seems to flicker, the reality of the situation beginning to settle in. Ben knows that this isn't the end. He will keep helping Mr. Grant until they find an answer, whatever it may be. And as they walk away from the information desk, Ben feels a renewed sense of purpose. Mr. Grant doesn't have to face this alone, not anymore. Ben couldn't shake the uneasy feeling after what they learned at the information desk. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that Mr. Grant might be caught in something far more troubling than a simple misunderstanding. Over the next couple of days, Ben decides to take a different approach, one that might reveal what exactly was going on. He knows he has to be careful. Mr. Grant's trust is fragile, and Ben doesn't want to break it. On the seventh day, Ben sits down beside Mr. Grant, who is still waiting, his eyes wandering toward the arrival's gate, his bouquet now a brittle collection of stems and faded petals. "Mr. Grant," Ben starts softly, "I was thinking. If you'd like, I could keep you company for a while. Maybe we could talk a bit more about who you're waiting for." Mr. Grant hesitates, then smiles, though the expression is tinged with exhaustion. "That would be nice, Ben. You know, it helps to have someone here. I appreciate it, truly." He takes a deep breath, looking down at the flowers. "I met her online, you see. It's been some time now. We've shared so many messages. She's been a light in my life after so many dark years. I know people think it's silly, an old man falling in love over the internet, but it's real to me." Ben listens, nodding along as Mr. Grant continues. His heart tightens with a mixture of sympathy and concern. The way Mr. Grant spoke about this woman, the hope in his eyes despite everything, made Ben's suspicion grow stronger. He knows all too well how easy it is to prey on the vulnerable, especially those seeking connection in lonely times. "Do you have any pictures of her?" Ben asks gently, hoping to learn more. Mr. Grant pulls out his phone, his hands trembling slightly as he unlocks it. He scrolls through a series of messages, stopping at a picture, a young woman with a kind smile. She looked to be in her 30s, far younger than Mr. Grant. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Mr. Grant says, his eyes misty. He shows Ben some of their conversations. Messages filled with warmth and affection, words that promise love and a future together. Ben's heart sinks. The language used in the messages is generic, almost scripted, and the age difference only adds to his concern. "She does seem lovely," Ben replies, careful to keep his voice neutral. "But, Mr. Grant, have you ever spoken to her on a video call?" Mr. Grant shakes his head. "No, she always said her connection wasn't good enough. We've only texted, but she promised that once she arrived, we'd be together properly." He looks at Ben, his gaze searching. "You think something's wrong, don't you, Ben?" Ben pauses, considering his next words carefully. He doesn't want to alarm Mr. Grant, but he also knows he has to be honest. "I just want to make sure you're safe, Mr. Grant. Sometimes people online aren't always who they say they are. I think it might be a good idea to reach out to someone for help. Maybe the police or someone who can look into this more closely." Mr. Grant's face falls, and for a moment, Ben fears he's overstepped. But then the elderly man nods, a look of resignation passing over his features. "I suppose I've thought about that too," he admits. "I wanted so badly to believe in something good. It's been so long since I've felt this kind of hope." Ben places a comforting hand on Mr. Grant's shoulder. "Hope is never a bad thing, Mr. Grant. But I don't want anyone to take advantage of your kindness. Let me help you. We can contact the authorities, just to be safe. They might be able to track down more information about her." After a moment of silence, Mr. Grant nods again. "Okay, Ben, I trust you. Let's do it." Ben feels a mixture of relief and determination wash over him. He knows that taking action now is crucial. He calls for support, reaching out to airport security and informing them of the situation. The officers listen attentively, their expressions serious as they understand the gravity of what might be happening. They agree to help Mr. Grant and begin gathering information, including contacting the local authorities for further investigation. Later that day, Ben and Mr. Grant sit together as they wait for news. The airport security team works diligently, using their resources to try to find out more about the woman Mr. Grant has been waiting for. Ben stays by Mr. Grant's side, keeping him company, offering reassurance whenever the elderly man's eyes grow distant, lost in thought. As the hours pass, an officer finally approaches them, his expression sympathetic but grim. "Mr. Grant," he begins, "we've looked into the details you provided. Unfortunately, it seems there's no record of this individual traveling to this airport or even existing in any official capacity. We believe you may have been targeted in a scam." Mr. Grant's face crumples, the weight of the words settling heavily on his shoulders. He looks down at the roses in his lap, their petals now almost completely wilted. "So, it was all a lie," he whispers, his voice breaking. I wanted it to be real. Ben feels his own heart ache at the sight of Mr. Grant's devastation. He wraps an arm around the elderly man, offering what comfort he can. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Grant. You didn't deserve this. But you're not alone. We're going to make sure you're okay, and we'll do everything we can to help you through this." Mr. Grant nods, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Thank you, Ben," he says, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ben stays with Mr. Grant for the rest of the day, helping him contact his family and making sure he has somewhere safe to go. He knows that the road ahead will be difficult for Mr. Grant, that the pain of his betrayal will not fade easily. But Ben also knows that Mr. Grant will not have to face it alone. As they leave the airport together, Ben feels a sense of resolve. He may not have been able to give Mr. Grant the reunion he hoped for, but he could give him something just as important: support, compassion, and the promise that he would not face this heartbreak alone. Ben stood alongside Mr. Grant, feeling the tension rise as they waited in the arrivals area. Mr. Grant's eyes were fixed on the doors, the hope in them almost palpable. His fragile hand still clutched the bouquet of wilted roses, and Ben couldn't help but pray for a miracle. The airport security team stood by, subtly positioned to keep a close watch. Ben had briefed them on what might happen. There were too many inconsistencies in Mr. Grant's story for Ben to believe that this would end happily, but he still hoped to be proven wrong. After what seemed like hours, Ben noticed two men walking toward them. There was something about their demeanor, their eyes darting around, the way they whispered to each other. That put Ben on high alert. They were not travelers. They didn't have luggage or the kind of anticipation one would expect in an arrivals hall. Ben's instincts screamed that something was off. Mr. Grant, oblivious to the unease, took a step forward. "That must be them," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and anxiety. "She must have sent them to meet me." Ben quickly stepped in front of Mr. Grant, holding up a hand as if to shield him. He turned slightly, giving the security team a discreet nod. The men approached, their smiles forced and insincere. One of them, a tall, lanky figure, spoke first. "You Mr. Grant?" he asked, his voice rough. Ben could see the way his eyes flicked toward the small bag at Mr. Grant's feet. A bag Ben knew contained the money Mr. Grant had brought for his supposed friend. Yes, that's me," Mr. Grant replied eagerly, stepping forward. Ben put a firm hand on Mr. Grant's shoulder, stopping him. "Hold on a second," Ben said, his voice calm but commanding. He turned his gaze to the men, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you, and why are you here?" The shorter man shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. "We're just here to pick up Mr. Grant," he said, his tone defensive. Ben shook his head slowly, his heart pounding. He could feel Mr. Grant trembling beside him, the old man's hopes slowly being replaced by confusion. "I think you need to step back," Ben said, his voice steady. He gestured subtly to the security team, who began moving in. The two men exchanged glances, and Ben could see the panic beginning to set in. One of them took a step back, but before they could make a move, airport security was on them. The men were quickly surrounded, their protests drowned out by the firm commands of the officers. Mr. Grant looked on, bewildered, his eyes darting between the men and Ben. "What's happening?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Where is she? Where's my friend?" Ben turned to Mr. Grant, his expression softening. "Mr. Grant, I'm so sorry," he said gently. "These men, they're not here to help you. I think they were trying to take advantage of you." He paused, watching as understanding dawned in Mr. Grant's eyes, the hope that had sustained him for so long crumbling in an instant. Mr. Grant's face fell, the color draining from his cheeks. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "No, this can't be true. She was real. She was supposed to be here." His legs gave way, and Ben quickly caught him, guiding him down to the bench. "I'm so sorry," Ben repeated, his own heart breaking for the elderly man. Tears welled in Mr. Grant's eyes, his frail body shaking with the weight of his despair. "How could this happen?" he said, his voice cracking. "I believed in her. I thought I thought I finally had something to look forward to. Ben sat beside him, his arm around Mr. Grant's shoulders, offering what comfort he could. "You're not alone, Mr. Grant," he said softly. "I'm here. We'll get through this together." He looked up, watching as the security team led the two men away, their identities now being checked, their scam being unraveled. He knew that they had prevented something terrible from happening, but that knowledge did little to ease the pain Mr. Grant was feeling. Mr. Grant wept quietly, the roses slipping from his hands and falling to the floor, their petals scattering. It was a heartbreaking sight, a symbol of the hope that had kept him going, now lying in pieces. Ben stayed by his side, holding him as the old man grieved the loss of a dream that had been cruelly taken from him. After some time, Mr. Grant looked up at Ben, his eyes red and puffy. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice filled with a heartbreaking vulnerability. "I have nothing left." Ben shook his head, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You have people who care about you, Mr. Grant," he said. "You have me, and we're going to make sure you're okay. We'll contact your family and we'll get you home. You're not alone in this." Mr. Grant nodded slowly, his expression one of exhaustion and sorrow. "Thank you, Ben," he whispered. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." Ben offered a small, sad smile. "I'm just glad I could help," he said. "You deserve better than this, Mr. Grant. And I promise, we'll get through this together." With the help of airport security, Ben contacted Mr. Grant's family, explaining the situation as gently as he could. They were shocked and saddened, but grateful that Ben had been there to protect him. Arrangements were made for Mr. Grant to return home, and Ben stayed with him until his family arrived, never leaving his side. As Mr. Grant was finally led away by his family, he turned back to Ben, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said one last time, his voice thick with emotion. Ben nodded, watching as the elderly man disappeared into the crowd, the weight of the past days heavy on both their shoulders. Ben knew that Mr. Grant's journey was far from over. The pain of what had happened would linger, but at least now, Mr. Grant had the support he needed. And as Ben turned back to his duties, he felt a sense of resolve. He hadn't been able to give Mr. Grant the reunion he dreamed of, but he had given him something just as important, a promise that he wouldn't have to face his heartbreak alone. And sometimes Ben thought that was enough. In the aftermath of the heartbreaking revelation, Ben stayed close to Mr. Grant, offering him the comfort of a kind word and the warmth of genuine compassion. The elderly man, so visibly broken by the deceit, leaned on Ben for support, his body still trembling with the shock of the truth. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Mr. Grant," Ben said softly, his voice sincere. "You are a good person, and none of this is your fault. There are people out there who take advantage of kindness, but it doesn't mean you were wrong to hope." Mr. Grant looked at Ben, his eyes hollow with the weight of his shattered dreams. "I just wanted something to look forward to," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's been so long since I felt like I mattered to someone." His words struck Ben deeply, reminding him of the profound loneliness that many people, especially those of Mr. Grant's age, often face. Ben reached out, placing a comforting hand on Mr. Grant's arm. "You matter, Mr. Grant. You matter a lot. And there are people who care about you, your family, your friends. I care about you too." Ben paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think it might help to talk to someone, a counselor, perhaps. It's important to have a space where you can process everything that's happened. I can help you find someone to talk to, if you'd like." Mr. Grant hesitated, his gaze falling to the floor. The idea of opening up to a stranger about his pain was daunting, but deep down, he knew that he couldn't carry this burden alone. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe talking to someone would help." Ben smiled gently. "It's a brave step, Mr. Grant. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you." He pulled out a small piece of paper and scribbled down his contact information. "This is my number. If you ever need someone to talk to, or if you need anything at all, just call me. I mean it. Mr. Grant took the piece of paper with trembling hands, his eyes welling with tears. Thank you, Ben, he said, his voice cracking. You've been so kind to me. I don't know what I would have done without you. Ben shook his head, his heart heavy with empathy. You're stronger than you realize, Mr. Grant, and you'll get through this, one day at a time. As the day drew to a close, Ben stayed with Mr. Grant, making sure he was comfortable and ensuring that he had everything he needed for the night. Airport security had arranged for a hotel room where Mr. Grant could rest until his family arrived, and Ben wanted to be sure that the elderly man felt safe and cared for. The hotel room was modest, but it offered warmth and privacy, a small respite from the emotional turmoil that had unfolded. Before Ben left, he sat with Mr. Grant for a while longer, the two of them sharing quiet conversation. Mr. Grant spoke about his late wife, the years they had spent together, and the loneliness that had set in after she passed. Ben listened intently, his heart aching for the man beside him. It was clear that Mr. Grant had so much love to give, but nowhere to direct it. It made the betrayal he had just experienced all the more painful. You know, Mr. Grant said, his voice wistful, I thought that maybe this was my second chance. A chance to find happiness again. To not be alone anymore. He paused, his eyes glistening. I suppose it was foolish of me. Ben shook his head firmly. It wasn't foolish at all, Mr. Grant. Wanting to find love, to connect with someone, that's never foolish. It's human. It's what makes us who we are. And just because this didn't turn out the way you hoped, doesn't mean that hope was misplaced. There are still good people out there. People who care about you, who want to see you happy. Mr. Grant looked at Ben, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You're one of those good people, Ben. I've seen that. Thank you for being here for me. Ben smiled back, his heart swelling with a mixture of sadness and hope. I'm just doing what anyone should do. And I promise you, things will get better. It might take time, but you'll find your way through this. By the time Mr. Grant's family arrived, the elderly man seemed calmer, the weight of his heartbreak still present but less crushing. His daughter, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, rushed to his side, her eyes filled with concern. Ben watched as she knelt beside her father, wrapping him in a gentle embrace. It was clear that Mr. Grant was deeply loved, and Ben felt a sense of relief knowing that he would be in good hands. Before they left, Mr. Grant turned to Ben one last time. I won't forget this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I won't forget your kindness. Ben nodded, his own eyes misting over. Take care of yourself, Mr. Grant. And remember, if you ever need anything, I'm just a phone call away. As Mr. Grant and his family walked away, Ben felt a mixture of emotions. Sorrow for the pain Mr. Grant had endured, but also hope for the future. The elderly man had faced a cruel deception, but he had also found something real in the process. A genuine connection, a reminder that there were still people in the world who cared. Ben stood there for a moment, watching until they disappeared from sight. He then turned back to his duties, his heart heavy but resolute. He knew that what he had done for Mr. Grant was important. He hadn't been able to give him the reunion he had dreamed of, but he had given him something just as valuable. The promise that he wasn't alone, and the assurance that kindness still existed in the world. And sometimes Ben thought that was enough. Thank you for watching this powerful story of courage, compassion, and vigilance. Today's tale is a reminder to cherish our connections and protect those who may be vulnerable. Mr. Grant's experience reveals the importance of being cautious online and highlights the compassion of those, like Ben, who look out for others selflessly. Please share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Life Story 999 for more stories that inspire and teach valuable life lessons.